On the surface, The Legend of the War of the Lions is a politically driven epic fantasy that fits pretty squarely into genre conventions. Delving deeper, though, leads the audience to a tragic story of two friends driven apart by incompatible ideologies. While the depth of its world-building, secret plots of betrayal and conquest, bombastic action, and supernatural manipulation from the shadows provide abundant mystery and intrigue that will carry most players through to the end, it's at the heart of the narrative that we find an exploration of consequentialism, and a demonstration of the loss of self that can come from consigning to the philosophy that the ends justify the means. By 1993, Final Fantasy had securely planted its roots and was growing into a powerful IP. It was at this time that series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, who is a self-professed fan of tactical RPGs, started thinking about how Final Fantasy might be adapted to the genre. Due to his heavy involvement with the main series, though, Final Fantasy Tactics had to be shelved for a couple of years. But in 1995, Square hired Yasumi Matsuno, a talented young director who had previously worked with Quest developing Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen, and Tactics Ogre: Let Us Cling Together for the Super Nintendo. In view of this experience, Matsuno seemed a natural fit for tailoring Final Fantasy into a strategy game. This game has been the fulfillment of a dream for me, both as a creator and a player. As a game creator, I've long wanted to make a strategy RPG using the Final Fantasy world and setting, and as a player, I've been wanting to play that game myself. When I came to Square and heard about this game, my immediate response was, please let me do it. In a sense, it was the perfect timing to make use of my previous experience and a huge opportunity as well. To assist Matsuno in his directorial debut with the company, Square appointed Hiroyuki Ito, battle designer for Final Fantasy IV, V, and VI, the latter of which he also worked on as a co-director, to serve as lead battle designer for Final Fantasy Tactics. This was an interesting choice because preceding this assignment, he wasn't very fond of tactical RPGs. I find all the work you have to do with units, equipping them, switching weapons, etc. to be so tedious and annoying that midway through I always put the controller down and walk away. My goal for Final Fantasy Tactics was to make a game that I wouldn't feel like walking away from. I also wanted a game where the strategy would feel exciting and urgent. I really wanted to try adding a sense of swashbuckling heroism, like the feeling of a soldier who bursts into an enemy camp and battles his way out. It's perhaps because of these sentiments that Matsuno and Ito began to stray pretty significantly from the original design document that Sakaguchi had drawn up, choosing instead to stick to a philosophy much more in line with that of Tactics Ogre. Sakaguchi, however, seemed content to leave these choices entirely within their discretion. Looking at it now, it seems they adopted a very different system from the one I described, and a lot of my ideas were dropped. It was fully up to Matsuno and Ito to decide which ideas to use, you see. My role was one of watching from the sidelines. As a strategy game fan, I'm really looking forward to playing it. As development moved forward, it was more than just gameplay systems that ended up being altered from Sakaguchi's initial vision. The story, too, experienced a pretty large tonal shift from what fans had come to expect from a Final Fantasy game. As was the case with his previous work, Matsuno set out to create a world that was more somber, grounded, and bleak than its contemporaries in the main series. The world of Ivelisse, as it would later be named, would be one that emphasized corrupt aristocracies, starving, desperate, and fearful populations, deep-rooted plots of betrayal, and conflicted characters profoundly changed by the disastrous effects of harrowing losses. While I wouldn't say it presents its messages with any true moral ambiguity, I do believe the writers did a fantastic job of highlighting why certain villains think and act the way they do. While a few of the previous Final Fantasy games featured villains that, at least I would consider to be shallow when it comes to personal motivations, Final Fantasy Tactics shines as an example of how to truly humanize antagonists, making them feel simultaneously abhorrent but believable, at least for the first 2 acts of the story. The result of this is a tone that exudes urgency and pressing high stakes, which is exactly what I tend to gravitate toward personally in the fiction that I enjoy. I find Sakaguchi's own comments about the weight of the themes Matsuno was striving to articulate very interesting. One time I took a look at the whiteboard that Matsuno would sometimes have by his desk, and I saw a huge chart that detailed all the character relationships. I remember seeing one of the connections between the characters, and it said they have a hard time understanding each other. I thought to myself, man, this is gonna be a deep game. When the interviewer commented about how the dialogue appeared to have changed drastically in style from previous games, he responded by saying, "Yeah, someone like you wouldn't understand. We've never had a character in a Final Fantasy game utter lines like that." It's for this reason that Final Fantasy Tactics stands among my very favorite stories within the medium. There's just something about this style of storytelling that seems to gel with me, though I do think it's fair for those who like more lighthearted adventures to feel as if the game is humorless. There isn't very much levity or playfulness in Tactics, standing as a stark contrast to the main series, which is typically bursting with a whimsical kind of charm that you honestly just won't find here. It's got a couple of moments, but for the most part, the game is laser focused on the darker subject matter. Personally, I really dig that, but if you're a big fan of the main series and you want to give this game a try, I think it's important that you go in with the proper expectations when it comes to the tone and delivery of the story. Along those lines, I really like the script. Because of the medieval-inspired setting, it's written in a more elevated style, something we hadn't really seen in any of the previous translations while the series lived on Nintendo consoles, and of course wouldn't have felt appropriate for Final Fantasy VII's world. This is probably a good time to bring up the War of the Lions version, which is the PSP port of the game that's also available on iOS and Android devices, because it's incredibly different from the original. The PlayStation 1 version suffers from many of the same kinds of translation errors that most games produced by Square during that time shared. You know, things like bad English and a lot of very plain prose that loses some of the subtlety and underlying meaning of particular scenes. But thankfully, the PSP version recaptures that and is written in what I would consider to be a much more consistent early modern English-inspired mode, which I think reads beautifully a vast majority of the time. There are times when it can feel like the writers were trying a little too hard to sound flowery or poetic, which might bother some players, but for the most part, I was really into it. I'd say my only real problem with the War of the Lions script is that it tends to tone down the intense fear and hatred that the Resistance group expressed for the nobility in the PS1 version. It also changes the names and spellings of major characters, locations, abilities, and items, which will definitely throw players off who were around for the original. Aside from these issues though, I really can't recommend the War of the Lions version enough. I honestly feel that for the most part it's just a vastly superior translation. Now, if you aren't fond of the more archaic method of speech, or the strange renaming and spelling changes, the original script is still perfectly comprehensible and palatable. In either case, you'll be treated with a deep, thoughtful story that certainly covers a lot of derivative ground with its framework, but is highlighted with a contemplative inner scenario following the main character, Ramza Beov, and his best friend Delita Hyrule. It's in their near opposite responses to some of the first chapter's traumatic events that were provided with the game's more meaningful commentary and exposition. This is again where I need to bring up the War of the Lions version, which adds several scenes and even a couple of battles that really strengthen some of the characters' relationships and provide even more value to late-game payoffs. Additionally, this version of the game includes some very well-animated cinematic sequences that remain true to the original game's hand-drawn art style, but really add significant weight to the scenes in which they're used. This is due both to excellent stylistic choices with the art and camera shot selection, but also with competent voice acting and writing. These are just a few in a long list of reasons why I prefer the War of the Lions version, but again, regardless of which version you play, there's a lot going on under the surface that makes Final Fantasy Tactics a truly powerful experience. While the story covers a lot of material and is often focused on the larger plot, it's how the narrative uses its bookend scenes, which gives strong prominence to Ramza and Delita, that gives us the clearest picture of what the game is really about. I'll leave it at this, which I don't consider to be a spoiler, but if you're sensitive, then continue at your own risk. The final text box in the game features Delita wistfully asking the question, "Did you get your end in all of this, Ramza?" Or if you prefer the original script, "Ramza, what did you get?" It's this question, the need for Delita to even ask it in the first place, that encapsulates exactly what I think this game is trying to say at its core. It can be said that both Ramza and Delita succeeded in achieving their ambitions, gaining everything they wanted in one sense, but both characters also lost everything in different ways. That'll sound cryptic and perhaps even conflicting to some, but those who have played the game will know exactly what I mean when I say that, and for those who haven't played, well, you'll just need to pick up the game yourself to find out. There are those who will criticize the game for not giving very much character development to the main cast of heroes, but the fact that the villains get so much screen time and characterization really makes up for that. At least for me it does, and I think where the story is really focused again is on Ramza and Delita, so this lack of character development for a lot of the main heroes, for me wasn't too big of a deal, but I can understand why others would feel that way. So back to the interview referenced previously, Yasumi Matsuno explained that in his view, the two most important mechanics of an SRPG are the battle system and the character development system. When it comes to gameplay, it's clear that this is primarily where the developer's focus was directed for Final Fantasy Tactics. While the player won't be able to freely explore the world map, enter towns to interact with NPCs, or explore hidden passages in search of treasure, which is to say that there really isn't any traditional exploration in the game, the battle mechanics and character progression system provide some incredible depth and promote meaningful experimentation that more than make up for it. There are also a few additional features like fur trading, propositions, and recruiting secret characters that give a nice sense of flavor and diversity to the game that is otherwise dominated by battling. And in the War of the Lions version, they even added a multiplayer mode where players can battle with their friends. With the battle direction in the hands of Hiroyuki Ito, who as the father of the active time battle system has always emphasized speed and excitement in the games he's worked on, combat and tactics really does carry a thrill and sense of tension that may come as a surprise to those who are uninitiated to the world of tactical turn-based RPGs. Unlike some of the more classic games in the genre like Fire Emblem or Shining Force, Final Fantasy Tactics doesn't proceed through battles in phases, where the player gets to act with all of his or her units in any preferred order and all at once before turning the phase over to the enemy to do the same. Rather, each individual character's speed stat is factored into the overall turn order, which immediately gives an added layer of complexity to strategy that can make a bad move quickly punishable. The player is also only given a maximum of 5 units per battle, including the occasional special units that are not player-controlled, even though it has a total of 16 player-controlled units that can be kept in reserve in the PS1 version, with 24 slots being available in the PSP version. This makes the battles seem fairly small in scale in comparison to something like Fire Emblem, but don't worry, this game certainly isn't lacking for strategy because of this. Like many other games in the series, Final Fantasy Tactics truly impresses with its immense levels of customization. There are so many ways of approaching it that it's difficult to even give a preliminary list. You can recruit a large army with specialized units to draw upon when the situation calls for them, run with a small team of highly optimized units to fulfill multiple roles, or even capture monsters, breed them, and make them fight for you. There are 20 jobs available in the original version, with 2 jobs added in the War of the Lions, most of which have useful abilities that can be applied in various creative ways to destroy your enemies. In addition to this are 9 unique characters that come with their own special classes, who can be recruited at specific points of the story, again with 2 being added for the War of the Lions. Similarly to Final Fantasy V, characters can freely switch between jobs once they're unlocked, where they can learn abilities that are unique to those jobs and then take those abilities into others. This allows, for example, a ninja with the hand-to-hand combat strength of a monk to strike twice and completely decimate foes, which is one of the most robust combinations in the entire game, by the way. As an added layer of complexity, the game also contains a Zodiac System, where certain characters will have added advantages or weaknesses to other characters based on their personal Zodiac sign, and will likewise have favorable or poor compatibility with allies for casting healing magic and buffs. The game unfortunately doesn't do a good job of explaining this, and without realizing it, a player might set up a team with poor compatibility on complete accident and go through the game wondering why their healing buffs and spells seem to miss so often. On the flip side of that, it's also equally likely that a player unaware of the system will set up a team with neutral compatibility and not notice it at all, which to me makes it feel like an unnecessary and needlessly convoluted feature in what is otherwise an involved and engaging set of battle mechanics. Unlike Final Fantasy V, though, the jobs are not unlocked after progressing through story sequences, but rather through attaining job level requirements. This was a mistake in my opinion, because it allows players to take advantage of some early grinding opportunities in which it's possible to earn some of the best abilities in the game and completely obliterate the difficulty. Now, of course, I understand that if players go in without any prior knowledge, they won't know which abilities are the most useful, and if you do just try to progress through the story without grinding, Tactics might be the most difficult Final Fantasy game that there is, especially in the early going. It's definitely one of those games where the difficulty is highest at the outset and gets easier as you begin to understand how to create winning customizations. I think that developers attempted to implement a way of punishing players who spent too much time grinding by adding a level scaling system for random encounters, which doesn't apply to the main story battles, but as I've touched on before in my Final Fantasy VIII review, that just rarely works in this kind of RPG. So as the enemies scale in Tactics, they also acquire better and better equipment, which would make you think that it would be impossible to defeat them if you continued fighting for too long, since the high-level equipment won't be available for the player to buy so early on, but you could always just steal their equipment, land yourself a team with endgame gear, and one-shot your way to the credits screen. If you're the kind of player who enjoys discovering unique ways to become unbelievably powerful, and for the record I think that's a completely legitimate way of approaching RPGs like this, then you'll probably have a ton of fun with this game. If you're the kind of person who likes to place limits on yourself by doing challenge runs, you'll definitely enjoy this game a lot as well. However, if you're the kind of person who seeks for high levels of organic challenge, I think what you'll find is that the beginning of the game will feel very rewarding, but by the end you'll probably think it's too easy. Especially as so many of the mission win states simply become kill the boss, and the bosses tend to run straight at you haphazardly just to get cut down in one turn to end the battle. There's no doubt that the battle mechanics and mission objectives and tactics are far from perfect for experienced players, but I still found them to be a lot of fun as I discovered what worked best for me. And for players who are new to tactical RPGs, you're going to have your hands full for sure. One thing I do have to mention though, is just how overpowered some of these jobs are. I don't want to spoil any strategy for uninitiated players, but I'll just look out of the corner of my eye at the calculator and mediator jobs. Another thing that I have to mention is that this game has some incredibly bad level design in a few spots. So there are certain sequences where you'll be forced to fight through several battles in a row without a chance to leave and buy equipment or restock on items or level up your characters or anything. And that wouldn't be a bad thing necessarily if the developers didn't also give you the ability to save in between these successive battles, which creates a lot of opportunities for players to get stuck on a battle they can't win and have no way back. There's this one just particularly appalling battle containing what I would consider to be the worst level design and mission structure ever conceived in a tactical RPG, at least in my experience. One that forces so many players to reattempt it multiple times because it just requires straight luck to win. This battle also comes at the tail end of one of those successive battle sequences I was talking about. It's horribly frustrating, and many players have been forced to restart their playthroughs because of this kind of funneling. All I'll say is, use backup saves. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Now, with all of that being said, I'm still impressed by how fast, critical, and compelling the battles feel despite being a turn-based tactical RPG where the player can take as much time as he or she wants to give commands and think through strategies. I believe there are 3 reasons for this. 1 being the small size of the player's battle party, 2 being how powerful the visual and sound effects are on various attacks and magic, and 3 being the fact that the music is just absolutely masterful. On the first point, Matsuno explained, "Yeah, I don't think it's a traditional war simulation if I had to say. War games make me think of huge armies facing each other." That wasn't the direction we wanted to go in though, because we wanted to make something similar in feel to the Final Fantasy series, a game you can clear with 5 individual main party members that you raised and developed. On the second point, Ito gave this comment, "There's no inherent need for fancy graphics, but they are important in showcasing the growth of a character. In order to express just how powerful your unit has become, you want impressive visuals." On the third point, when asked about whether the music of Final Fantasy Tactics would retain the same dramatic urgency as his previous work, Matsuno responded by saying, "Actually, in the beginning, the idea for the music was more in line with Sakaguchi's tastes, exciting, energetic, and upbeat music. But owing to the direction we decided to take with the game, or my personality, we changed it. If Final Fantasy Tactics mainly involved humans versus monster battles, then I think exciting, upbeat music would have been very appropriate. But in this strategy game, your opponents are other human beings, and that kind of bright, upbeat music wasn't working. There's also the fact that Final Fantasy Tactics takes place in a hard, serious world, so I think it's only natural for the songs to be similar." I really like what Matsuno said here, because the key element of a score's lasting impact, in my opinion, is its ability to help communicate the themes of the work to its audience. Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack was composed primarily by Hitoshi Sakimoto, along with the help of longtime friend Masaharu Iwata, both of which had worked with Matsuno before on Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre. Sakimoto in particular is a figure worth noting because of his work on Vagrant Story, the Tactics sequels, and Final Fantasy XII, all of which take place in the world of Ivelisse. In a way, Sakimoto's music has more or less become the defining sound for this world. It's also worth noting that he would become the first to take Nobuo Uematsu's place as a principal composer for a mainline Final Fantasy game. There's been a great deal of criticism and comparison of Sakimoto's work to that of Uematsu's, whose styles are clearly different, but in my opinion, Sakimoto's work is first-rate, echoing the cinematic quality of Hollywood composers like John Williams. While Uematsu is known and revered for his great diversity in both genre and tone, Sakimoto has also developed a distinct and recognizable style, something I picked up on immediately while playing Vagrant Story in Final Fantasy XII. His music contains a bombastic, rich, and pressing quality, one that resonates deeply with me and fits perfectly for the world of Ivelisse. I strongly disagree with those who feel that his soundtracks need more diversity, like those of Uematsu's scores, for the same exact reasoning that Matsuno mentioned in his interview. The content of the stories Matsuno writes calls for a more serious, dramatic character, and it's a component of his work that I personally tend to appreciate. For this reason, I find the soundtrack of Final Fantasy Tactics to be both moving and inspiring, and consider it among the great video game OSTs right alongside Uematsu's work. The ending credits theme in particular struck a chord with me. And when those credits rolled, I couldn't help but feel that I had also played one of the great classics produced by Square during their golden years. I admit that this is largely due to the fact that Matsuno's style of storytelling is perfectly fitted for my personal tastes. His approach is just altogether suited for me, and I enjoyed this game so much that many of its shortcomings and oversights on the gameplay side, some of which are pretty major, were easily forgiven because of it. This game has a wonderfully structured story that imparts a real sense of loss and introspection and left me feeling completely satisfied. In addition to this is a fun set of extremely involved gameplay mechanics that allow the player immense levels of freedom and customization, and while that choice on the developer's part can lead to experienced players feeling like the game's too easy, I think most people will really enjoy what it has to offer. With remarkable visual and audio presentation as well as a beautiful musical score, I can't help but put this on the same level as all of the best games in the main series. I give Final Fantasy Tactics 4.5 overpowered calculators, or arithmeticians if you prefer the War of the Lions version, out of 5. Hey everyone, if you like what we're doing here on the channel and you would like to support us and help us grow, please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you're new to the channel and you'd like to see some of my other reviews, I've got a Final Fantasy playlist right here of all the Final Fantasy reviews I've done, or you can click here on the right and check out my Xenogears review. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I hope you have a great day.